I've been a lifelong fan of science fiction ever since being a very young kid and, first experiencing Star Wars and subsequently, Back to the Future and all these different kinds of things. And time travel, from the time machine to time after time, all these different entertainment mediums have always enraptured me. Time travel has always been probably my favorite science fiction sort of genre, trope, whatever you want to call it. And I'm by no means a mathematician, like calculus and fractional mathematics, high mathematics, all these different kinds of things that enter the framework of physics and, stuff like that go beyond the scope of my mind. I'm a very imaginative, visual-minded person. I'm a creator, an artist, a writer, all these different things. And so on an imaginative scale, I've always comprehended the idea of time travel, I think, much more simplistic than I've ever heard it discussed or engaged, whether within the confines of, the entertainment medium or real-world science and scientific theory, paradox theory, things like the bootstrap paradox and the grandfather paradox. The grandfather paradox is the one I've chiefly always had an issue with. And if we look at, like, Back to the Future as a perfect example, in that movie, you have Marty McFly going from 1985 back to 1955, meeting his parents, getting in between them, getting together, and the movie would have it through sort of these rose-colored glasses, this romanticism viewpoint of time travel, that the effects on the timeline are then moving sort of backwards, sort of circular in motion, to catch up with Marty in the past. The changes he's making in the past affect the future and thus circle back on him. And to me, that has never really made a lick of sense. At least to my estimation, the idea of the paradox, the grandfather paradox, being very much equivalent to that concept where someone, arguably a time traveler, goes back in time and tries to kill their grandfather, or does succeed in killing their grandfather. And the question I always hear when anyone hears this sort of, paradoxical theory is, well, then how could they have done that? How could they have gone back in the past if they never existed? And you get into sort of borderline string theory elements and multiple dimension elements and everything like that. But to me, it's always been a far more simplistic concept. The idea of timelessness, time as we understand it is a man-created way of calculating the revolutions of the planets around the sun in our solar system and everything like that. And scientific theory would have us understand that if we move beyond that sort of, gravity and mass equation out light years into space, look at Planet of the Apes, the start of that film, you had these, astronauts in space, deep space, and the flow of time for them, maybe they were, I don't remember the specific time frame, but let's say they were gone from Earth for 3 months. And time, because they are nowhere near these gravity pockets of planets and, the sort of revolutions of a planetary system, time is all but stopped for them. They cease to age, and when they would thus, sort of circle back to Earth, only as they are approaching that gravitational mass, once again, is time beginning to flow and affect, their re-entry, so to speak, so that they would be back on Earth, and it would be like 300,000 years later for everyone on Earth, but they would hardly have aged, that kind of thing. And I've always seen this as being sort of what I refer to as the timeless paradox, where I don't believe the flow of time, the effects of time on a time traveler. If a time traveler, again, using the Marty McFly equivalent, leaves the modern, normal flow of time to go back into the past, rather than the flow of time itself becoming paradoxical, the time traveler is the paradox, is the living paradox. They are, for want of another way of visualizing it, they are suddenly surrounded by a quantum bubble, a timeless paradoxical bubble that removes them from any events, if they go back into the past, that they so choose to change. Whether it's, kill their grandfather, wiping out their entire familial lineage, it would have no effect on them, is what I'm saying. Because for a time, no pun intended, they would have been removed from the normal flow of time, and time isn't going to arc back and get them back. You know, it's a very sort of, again, romantic rose-colored glasses concept of karma and time catching up with you, even if it has to go backwards to do it. And I don't believe it would ever work that way in legitimate scientific and time travel paradoxical thinking and theory. It's one of those things where I feel like, as somebody who watches a lot of Star Trek, a lot of Doctor Who and everything, timey-wimey is a term that was created by entertainment writers within the confines of Doctor Who to try to express it's a lot more simple than you think it is. It's not as complex as you think it is. At least to me, it's never been as complex as it seems to be made. If you look at a series like, I remember, watching many episodes of Star Trek Voyager, and Catherine Janeway, the captain of the Voyager, would talk about Starfleet Academy. One of the banes of her existence was temporal mechanics and the time travel theory and all that kind of stuff. And it was always a running gag because the sci-fi writers, like me, they weren't physicists, they weren't scientists, they probably couldn't hold their half of a conversation with a scientist who wanted to come at it from a quantum mechanic, physics-based conversation and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like there's much more a common sense equation there that the average person, the lay person, for lack of a better term, should be able to grasp. That once you leave the natural flow of time, if you go back into the past, the changes that happen from the point you left, whatever effects that manipulate the time you left from, as a result of whatever you do in the past, should not catch up to you, should not affect you. The only way they would affect you is if you then leap from that point in the past forward again to the future, taking yourself out of the flow of time. But then again, you get into that multidimensional string theory concept of the flow of time has splintered off into some new equation. And only then would you be affected by it. Like, let's say you go back in time and you give your younger self the winning lottery numbers on this given date, and then you go to the future from that point. Well, then you're going to have another you to contend with who wants all the money and is going to probably try to kill you because you, the existence, that you removed yourself from time, is still going to be very much the same. You're still the same person. You still have the same history. You were protected by that paradoxical timeless bubble, and thus were not affected by whatever changes you made. The only way you would be affected is if you sit back down again in the time you left after having changed things, and only then would things around you be different. That's kind of the way I'm looking at, and have always looked at, the idea of the paradox in time travel, especially, again, the grandfather paradox theory. Time is a straight line, and you leap out of it. You rise above it. You are no longer subject to its flow. You go back in time and subsequently dip back down into the timeline, and then you can be affected by the natural flow of time. Anything, you'll start aging again, at a normal pace, and if somebody, shoots a gun at you, you'll be killed in the past, and all these kinds of things. I just feel like it's always been overly complicated when it's such a simple, reasonable equation. There should be no, looking at Back to the Future, if Marty McFly goes back in time, kills his father, gets with his mother, there should be no, to my estimation, it's much more a fantasy, through rose-colored glasses equivalent to see that picture of he and his siblings beginning to fade because time, the changes in the timeline are working backward to catch up to him. That, to me, is an impossibility, at least the way I understand it. To me, he should be able to do whatever he wants, and it will have no effect on him. The only thing that will have an effect on him is if Biff suddenly decides to go and wring his neck and, nothing can stop him and Marty's luck has shorted out. Well, yeah, Biff can kill him in the past because now he's back. He's now subject again to the natural flow of time. Is any of this making sense? This is just one of those things I've for a long time wanted to talk about and have struggled to put into words how simplistic I find it and how reasonable I find it in mind. It's such an easy thing to grasp for me, and I don't understand why people have such a problem thinking of it. You know, like the reaction, the natural reaction to someone going back in time to kill their grandfather should not be, well, how can they have done that? They shouldn't exist. If you visualize it in your mind and you understand the concept of time travel, if time travel is a legitimate possibility, you're taking yourself out of the natural flow of time. I don't believe events can work backward through a flow of time, have a reverse effect to catch up to you in the past if you change the past. It's as I say, I mean, it seems like such a simple equation to me that if you presume time travel to be possible, breaking beyond the fourth dimensional barrier, whomever that individual or group of people are that time travel, that take it upon themselves to travel in time, if they are going, whether it's to the past or to the future. I mean, the future is a whole other ball game that really gets into the multi-dimensional string theorem, lines of thinking where you're talking about multiple dimensions, you're talking about splintered off timelines and all that kind of stuff. But I'm mostly focusing here on the past, where if you take yourself out of the modern flow of time and you go anywhere in the past, only the events in the normal flow of time, wherever you deposit yourself, can affect you. It can't, any changes you make to the past can't suddenly work itself around in a circular format to get at you. You're largely untouchable to whatever changes you make. And so yeah, I mean, that's always the way I've seen it anyway. And I don't know, I guess I'll catch you next time.